Hello everybody, welcome to World Wetlands Day of Heritage Week 2021, and I'm delighted to be presenting the findings of our breeding bird survey of Ardagullion Bog. And this survey was a partnership with Longford County Council and supported by the National Biodiversity Action Plan Fund. And it's also part of a project. We carried out breeding bird surveys of seven raised bog sites in the Midlands, which was part of a project supported by the Peatlands Community Engagement Fund of the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. So the survey is just behind us. We were carrying out the survey. We were busy surveying Ardagullion and the other sites during the spring and summer just gone. So I'm delighted now to be able to present our preliminary findings from Ardagullion Bog. And it was one of it was an amazing site to work on. It's an absolute gem of a site, and I think that's reflected in the breeding bird species that we found, the numbers that we found them in, and the diversity of species, as well as some priority species that we would hope to find, as well as, fair to say, some that we didn't record that weren't present, but hopefully will be in the future. So I'm going to jump straight into it. For those of you that aren't familiar with Ardagullion, I'm going to show you the location here. So Ardagullion Bog, it's in County Longford. It's about 8 kilometres south of Granard, and this is the small area of bog that we focused on, the small area of Ardagullion Bog. And if we take a step back, we can see in the wider landscape that there is plenty of other bogs in the wider area, and even the close by here, obviously the area that we focused on is part of a larger raised bog area, but there's quite a difference, as you can see straight away. You can see these areas of bogs have all the telltale signs of turf cutting. You can see the patterns there. So formerly by hand cutting, and more recently by mechanized turf cutting. So those areas, the bogs, are in quite a degraded condition, whereas this area, you can see around the fringes, there has been some turf cutting, but in general, it's in a much better condition. And there's areas of high bog and cut over bog within this area, and some areas of active raised bog. So this was the focus of our survey, and it's also the area that has been designated as a special area conservation. So this red boundary here is the boundary of the SAC, the special area conservation. So this is the area that it has been the focus of the Living Bog project, to restore this area, to restore the habitat of this area, but also was the focus of our breeding bird surveys, to get a better understanding of the bird species that are present. Now, it may look like a small area, it's about just under 120 hectares, but from a bird survey perspective, it is quite a large area, and particularly based on the methods, we wanted to get a very comprehensive understanding of the breeding bird species that are using this area. So and with Ardagullion Bog, we worked with the Living Bog project, and that was great because there has been some really detailed habitat surveys carried out, and a very good understanding as to the habitat condition of Ardagullion Bog, and obviously that's has been really important to inform the restoration works. So that information was available to us, and is and there has been really extensive and comprehensive vegetation mapping and habitat mapping of Ardagullion Bog. But up to now, it's fair to say that even though the flora has been quite well covered, that the fauna hasn't yet to date, and particularly the breeding birds. So that's where we came in, and where we wanted to address that and to change that, and to come out of it with a much better understanding as to what breeding birds are present, where they're using on the bog, what sort of numbers they're occurring in, and also what species should be there, maybe hopefully will be there in future that were absent. And it's a really important time to do that as well, because the Ardagullion Bog is the focus of, it's one of 12 project sites that's the focus of the Living Bog project, which is an EU Life funded project to restore these raised bog sites. And so it's a really interesting time to be looking at the breeding birds, because it's just at the initial stages of those restoration works. In terms of, a lot of the practical work has been carried out, but that hopefully over the coming years we're going to see really the benefits of those restoration works, in terms of improvement of the condition of Ardagullion and of the other bogs. And one of the main objectives of the restoration works is to re-wet the bogs. And you saw the images of the surrounding bogs, and one of the problems with most of our raised bogs in Ireland is that they're in degraded condition, and that's because of turf cutting. It's because of the bogs being drained and dried out, and also other factors such as afforestation, planting of non-native conifers, burning. So a lot of our bogs are in are in poor condition or in degraded state, and the surrounding bogs from Ardagullion, it's fair to say, are it's fair to describe them as that. Whereas the Ardagullion Bog itself, there that we're focusing on, there is still active raised bog, and there is, a really good potential to restore it to its former condition, and that's exactly what the Living Bog project are looking at doing. And a large focus of that is re-wetting the bog, restoring the water table, because the raised bogs should be wet. They shouldn't be dried out. So you can see here, even a short space of time, the difference. And because of these improvements in habitat, hopefully that's going to be reflective in the breeding bird species returning and recolonizing the bog, species that may have been lost in the past. So it's really interesting time to be looking at the bird species that are present. And so quite a big task as well, because obviously a lot of the species, they have different habitat requirements. They occur in different parts of the bog. Some of them are more discrete than others. They've also, different time patterns. Some, nocturnal. Others, better to survey early in the morning. So we wanted to get really, not just look at some of the birds, but to look at, to try and get a handle on all of the breeding birds present as much as we could anyway. So to do that, even though, as I said, it's quite a small area, we wanted to get a very comprehensive overview of the bird species present. So we used 5 different survey techniques, and that was catered to the diversity of habitats and the different bird species. And there were 3 main survey techniques, which are Transect surveys, Vantage point surveys, and Roving surveys, and also 2 specialised survey techniques for woodcock and for long-eared owl. So in total, we surveyed from April until the end of June, and we spent just under 60 hours of observation on or around the bog. And I'm going to start with Transect surveys, which are essentially exactly as they say in the tin. And we plotted transect routes over the open bog, walked those transect routes, and recorded all the breeding birds either side of the transect, and recorded the distance of those birds from the transect. And that'll allow us to work out breeding densities of those birds where they occur in good numbers, particularly the likes of meadow pipit and skylark, and also habitat associations. So the transect routes would take us right up to the edge of the open bog, but not into the surrounding fringe habitats, like scrub and woodland habitats, which we covered through other survey techniques. So you can see here, these are 4 transect routes that we plotted and carried out the surveys over, and these are the species that we recorded. So we recorded 29 bird species over the transect surveys, and some of them are some of the classic open bog specialist species, and the species you would hope and expect to find. And one of those being meadow pipit, which we recorded in good numbers on the bog, which was really good to see. And meadow pipit are actually a red listed bird of conservation concern, and I'll be talking a bit about the birds of conservation concern, which is essentially a list of birds in Ireland that are categorised on a traffic light system, red, amber or green, based on their conservation status, with red being those that are either endangered or that have experienced noticeable population declines or declines in range. And the meadow pipit is within that category. And even though they are still widespread, you can see here in the breeding bird atlas map, they are still widespread, but there have been declines recorded primarily through the Countryside Bird Survey. So really important bog species, and great to see it occur on Ardagullion in good numbers, as was skylark, which is an amber listed bird of conservation concern. Another bird which has declined quite a lot in about the past 4 decades or so. You can see this is the breeding atlas from the late 60s, early 70s. And then if we fast track 40 years on, we can see there has been noticeable declines in breeding distribution of skylark. Really, really positive to see good numbers of skylark on Ardagullion Bog, which is exactly what you want to see. And this sound fills the bog on early mornings, which is just a delight to listen to. So this is the song of the skylark, which they'll often make from very high, dizzying heights up in the sky over the bog, and can sometimes sing for extensive periods, so up to half an hour. So especially early in the season, just an amazing sound when all the skylarks, on a nice morning, early in the morning, they're all competing with each other to be heard, and it's just a classic sound of the bog. And delighted to say that this song rings out throughout Ardagullion. And then another species of the open bog is the snipe, and particularly recorded in the wetter areas on the bog. And again, this is the species which has experienced quite significant declines. You can see the breeding bird atlas map here from the first breeding bird atlas from the late 60s, early 70s. If we move on 40 years later, we can see noticeable declines. But again, really heartening to see good numbers of snipe on Ardagullion Bog. And again, this was one of the sounds of the survey, and one of the sounds that we were hearing regularly in Ardagullion, and particularly late in the evening and into the early night. And a really unusual sound, and it's actually not the bird calling. This sound we're hearing, this is from their display flight, which they'll fly up and then dive down at very fast speeds, and it's actually the sound of the wind, the vibrations through these feathers that you can see here. So it's actually a snipe has been referred to as the bleating goat in the sky in Ireland, and you can tell why based on the noise that you hear there. So again, amazing to see and hear snipe in reasonably good numbers or on Ardagullion Bog, and hopefully that's going with further re-wetting and restoration of the bog. That their numbers are going to improve further. Another one which was possibly definitely one of the highlights of the survey was recording breeding redshank on Ardagullion Bog, and we're absolutely delighted with that. It was a breeding redshank, as you can see here, the breeding distribution from the late 60s, early 70s, and again, more recent, you can see quite scarce as a breeding species in Ireland. People are probably more familiar with seeing redshank in the winter and along, particularly along the coast. But the breeding redshank, as with all our breeding waders, really have experienced worrying declines, and there's quite a trend, as you'll see, of breeding waders on the red list of birds conservation concern. So to record breeding redshank on Ardagullion Bog was just absolutely fantastic. And as I say, definitely one of the highlights of the survey. This is another one which, again, we were expecting and to find, but again, one of the real classic characteristic sounds of the raised bog. I'm sure everybody's familiar with this bird, which is obviously the cuckoo. And again, good numbers of cuckoo on Ardagullion Bog, and we're recording them on all the surveys, particularly the Transect surveys, flying over the open bog, often being harassed and mobbed by meadow pipit, by skylark, and obviously meadow pipit being one of their main host species that they will lay their eggs in the nests of meadow pipit. So if meadow pipit are doing well and suitable habitat conditions for meadow pipit, then obviously good chance of good conditions for cuckoo as well. So cuckoo, even though they have declined, kind of particularly over more intensive farmland, and show that's why our raised bog sites are so important, but they are still on the green list of birds of conservation concern. And also as well, another highlight was recording breeding teal on Ardagullion Bog, which was again absolutely fantastic. Similar to redshank, teal are an amber listed bird of conservation concern, and again quite scarce as a breeding species, recorded as a breeding species. So again, to record teal on Ardagullion, we did record them on some of the other raised bog sites, was absolutely fantastic. And then we also carried out vantage point surveys, And these were probably they were the most time consuming of the surveys. And the idea with these is, from the Transect surveys, obviously we're walking and recording the species that we record, but Transect surveys aren't very suitable for some of the more discrete species, and say, some of the species, the likes of, raptors, that you need other techniques to record. So Vantage Point surveys are suitable for that, and particularly focused on Vantage Point surveys, were primarily from the bog, looking to the fringe habitats, which is which is the suitable nesting conditions for the likes of raptors, of corvids. So these blue diamonds are our Vantage Point locations, and then the red shaded area are the views that we had from those Vantage Points. So you can see really good coverage of all the fringe habitats of the bog. And then obviously the interior of the bog we didn't focus on that through the Vantage Point surveys, but we did cover that the interior obviously through the Transect surveys. So these are some of the species we recorded through the Vantage Point surveys. Again, this is one, kestrel, which we expected and hoped to record, and we did, but it definitely isn't a given. And but absolutely amazing species, and recorded breeding evidence of kestrel. And you can see here kestrel in their hunting mode. And kestrel in Ireland, their Irish name is An Pucra, which translates as the wind puncher, which I think is just a fantastic and very apt, very beautifully visual and apt the name for kestrel, and describes its hunting behaviour, which is what you see here, which is kestrel hovering, sometimes almost motionless in the air, particularly in an updraft of wind, and can be very high in the air, looking beneath them for any movement of potential prey, the likes of small mammals, lizards, frogs, small birds. And they were regularly hunting on and over the bog and the fringe areas of the bog, and very likely nesting very close by. They are a species that have been added to the red list of bird of conservation concern just this year, in the most recent iteration of the birds of conservation concern, and they are a species that we've seen some worrying declines, particularly from the Countryside Bird Survey, and that's likely due to intensification of farming, changes of farming practice, as well as increased use and increased toxicity of rodenticides. So it again just shows the importance of raised bogs and sites like Ardagullion, where kestrel are doing well, and we recorded them on all the raised bog sites that we surveyed. Another raptor that we recorded breeding evidence was sparrowhawk, which regularly seen around the fringes of the bog, and again likely nesting close by, either on the fringes or in tree lines or hedgerows in the surrounding farmland. And again, a species that we expected and expected to encounter, and we did. And another raptor, which is the most common raptor that we recorded, which is this guy, which is buzzard. And buzzard is a really interesting background to buzzard, and they're definitely one of the most positive successes in Irish birds in recent decades, in that they were previously driven to extinction going back over 100 years ago, and were absent for a long period throughout the country, but have recolonized going back to the 50s and 60s from Scotland to the Antrim coast, and then have slowly spread throughout the country. And they there have been in Longford for some time now, but the fact that and even this map here on the Breeding Bird Atlas, which is very much outdated now, and this is from 2008, 2011, whereas buzzards now have essentially recolonized the whole country. But really good to see them and around Ardagullion, and again, likely several pairs nesting close by and frequently seen on and around the bog. And another bird that we recorded from the Vantage Point surveys is this bird, which I think is very much underappreciated, which is the raven, and an absolutely beautiful bird, incredibly intelligent bird, and just amazing behavior to watch and also to listen to. And this is very much a characteristic sound of the bog as well, the raven kind of honking in the distance. So they were regularly seen as well on the bog. And then we also carried out roving surveys, which was essentially to cover kind of the fringe, the woodland and scrub habitats, just like you see here. And probably the easiest and possibly the most enjoyable of the survey methods, because essentially all that's required is walking around, stopping every now and again, listening to or observing the birds in these fringe habitats. And we recorded 39 bird species on the roving surveys, And obviously you can see here we only focused on the perimeter. We didn't look at the interior, because obviously they were covered through the Transect surveys. And some of the species recorded, the likes of this guy, grasshopper warbler, and you can work out where it got its name from its call. So amazing bird to listen to, really cryptic call, difficult to pinpoint where it's coming from. And another bird that will call similar to snipe, late in the evening and during the night. So grasshopper warbler, black cap, willow warbler, white throat, all recorded in the kind of fringe habitats around the edges of the bog. Species like jay as well, and the scrub and the woodland. And then also, as I mentioned, the specialised surveys, because there's a couple of species that we're just not going to record from the methods that I've talked about already. And two of those are woodcock and long-eared owl. And woodcock, the survey method that's required for it to determine if there's woodcock present and record woodcock is select a suitable vantage point and to watch that, to carry out a watch just before sunset, just at dusk as it's getting dark, and to record woodcock flyovers or woodcock roading. And we did that, and we were delighted to record good numbers of woodcock. We'd 19 seen, or 20 observed over the woodcock surveys, and from this area here, which is absolutely fantastic. And woodcock again are a species that similar to snipe, similar to redshank, they're on the red list of birds conservation concern. And you can see the distribution map, the breeding distribution is quite sparse of woodcock. So fantastic to get them in good numbers on Ardagullion Bog. And then the other specialised survey was for long-eared owl, focused on long-eared owl. And this involved 3 survey visits over the breeding season to walk around the edge of the bog. So basically to within hearing distance of all the potentially suitable breeding habitat for long-eared owl, which would nest in trees and conifer plantation, or in the in small copses, or essentially any trees that would have a suitable stick nest that they could nest in. So the long-eared owl would be quite vocal during the early part of the breeding season when the adults would be calling, but then particularly so later in the season when the young are out and the young are calling. And this is what we were listening for, which is the young long-eared owl calling. Very noticeable call, and if you hear that, it's hard to mistake it with anything else you're hearing, and particularly at night time, obviously. So unfortunately we didn't record long-eared owl, even though the habitat looks perfect for them, and it was quite a surprise that we didn't. But we didn't record long-eared owl there. Now it was quite a poor breeding season for owls in general, so maybe that has influenced the lack of long-eared owl, at least successful long-eared owl in the area. So we were delighted that all the surveys combined, we recorded 46 species on and around the bog, and you can see them all plotted here. And we're going to be doing a lot more work looking at habitat associations, breeding densities, able to compare to other bog sites, look at what areas of the bog are particularly important for what species, and to look at how the restoration works and the re-wetting is benefiting particular species and birds generally. So 46 species we were delighted with, and really shows that the importance of the site, the diversity of habitats, which was fantastic. So this is the 46 species, and it's also really important to look and see the in relation to the conservation status of them, and you can see that of the 46 species, 5 are on the red list of birds conservation concern. 1 raptor, 3 waders, and meadow pipit. So and of those, 3 of the 5, so redshank, snipe, and meadow pipit, breed on the open bog itself. Whereas kestrel and woodcock be close by. Kestrel hunting on and around the bog, and woodcock typically are in the forest and the perimeter of the bog. So when we look at the amber listed birds conservation concern, there's 9. So mallard, teal, common gull, which was just not associated directly with the bog, just fly over, skylark, sand martin, barn swallow, willow warbler, goldcrest, and greenfinch. So this just shows just how important it's a very small site, but it's just absolutely, the value of this site for biodiversity, and that can, birds are a really good indicator of, the health of the particular sites and the condition. And I think this just shows just how important Ardagullion is. But also as well, it's fair to say that there were some species that were conspicuous in their absence. And we were hoping very much that we would record curlew, but unfortunately we didn't on Ardagullion. Red grouse is one that we didn't record, but that's potentially due to the timing of our surveys. So red grouse surveys are optimal time for red grouse surveys are much earlier in the year, whereas our survey started in April. So based on the condition of the bog, it would be we would hope to go back to look at to carry out more specialized surveys for red grouse, and then also Merlin. And Merlin was one that we very much, the Vantage Point surveys were geared towards recording Merlin, and we had very good coverage of that. So we were hopeful that if Merlin were there, that we would record them. But unfortunately, we didn't record Merlin, and that's another bird that is very much associated with raised bogs. And the condition seemed very good for Merlin in terms of prey availability through meadow pipit, skylark, and other species, and also the potential nesting habitat. But unfortunately, no sign of Merlin, both either observations or actual signs. We did some sign searching as well, and no confirmation of Merlin on site, which is a shame. But again, it's at the early stages of the restoration project, and hopefully over time, with further improvements on the site, we will see some of these birds, the likes of Merlin, the likes of curlew, return to Ardagullion. But even as it is, I think you'll see that just the value of the site for a small site, that the diversity of bird life, and including some species of conservation concern, it really is a special site. Just to give some thank yous, so the Breeding Bird Survey was carried out by ourselves, BirdWatch Ireland, in partnership with Longford County Council, with the support of the National Biodiversity Action Plan Fund, and also the Peatlands Community Engagement Fund of the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. So thank you, and it was such a fantastic project to be involved with and to work on, and at Ardagullion and at the other sites. So it really was a pleasure, and please watch this space, because we'll be feeding back the findings of the surveys in more detail as well over the coming months towards the end of the year. So special thanks to Mairead, the Heritage Officer, Longford County Council, who supported this work and was a pleasure to work with. Also as well, a huge thanks to Isabel Oakes, who carried out all the survey work on the ground for these surveys. So all the data you saw there, Isabel was absolutely fantastic in the field and went to huge lengths to ensure that the survey was carried out well, and was absolutely excellent in the field. So huge thanks to Isabel, and also Laura Kavanagh, the survey coordinator, who's done all the hard work in terms of the planning and mapping, and again, it was a pleasure to work with. And then also the Living Bog team, and especially Ronan Casey and Will, who were great, and also Orla Joyce in the Peatlands Management Unit. So I hope you enjoyed the talk. I hope you enjoyed Heritage Week, and please do. We'll be feeding back more of the findings from the surveys, some short videos and updates, as well as the final reports and findings. So please do keep an eye out for them. And thanks very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.